Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Sunday, November 10th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 7-2 after a 28-27 win over the Washington Commanders in Landover, Maryland in Week 10 of the 2024 NFL season. I'm Josh Yourish, and today we're going to jump into an instant reaction to the big win because the Steelers are doing exactly what they need to do before the divisional onslaught begins for this team. It's coming quickly, but they've racked up 7 wins before it, and next week will host the Baltimore Ravens. So this was a huge one for Pittsburgh, and it felt like between the Steelers and the Commanders, it was a matter of proving who's legit because Washington's off to a great start, and they have Jaden Daniels. They have a hot new offense. Cliff Kingsbury has figured things out after an ugly departure in Arizona, and then whatever the USC Caleb Williams experience was as their offensive coordinator now. And the Steelers, Justin Fields to Russell Wilson, really good defense, just keep winning. But there's kind of an asterisk next to a lot of the Steelers' big wins, right? Especially against the better teams they've played. Against Atlanta, Kirk Cousins' first game off an Achilles. Against Denver, Bo Nix's second start. Against the Chargers, Justin Herbert with an ankle injury. You don't have that in this game. You have some weird things that if Washington would have won, you could have used as excuses for why the Steelers didn't pull it out. But this is the first win where you can really stamp it and say, the Steelers are a good team and they can beat a good team. And they did it. And it was unconventional, and at times it was very ugly. And we're going to get into the offense. But they pulled it out against Washington, and the defense made enough big plays and a big stop. And it came down to inches, which makes sense between these two teams that are very evenly matched. Steelers with an elite defense, Washington with an elite offense. And some of it came down to special teams. We'll just go through some of the mayhem of the fourth quarter because it was a crazy, crazy finish. Washington had a chance to take the lead after the Steelers scored. Mike Williams, a touchdown on a big time throw from Russell Wilson, and Williams beat the defender wide open on a 3rd and 9, 32-yard touchdown to give the Steelers the 28-27 lead. And then Washington had a very real chance, got to 4th and 9, completed a pass to Zach Ertz over the middle of the field. And it was inches short with DeMonte Casey and Minkah Fitzpatrick making the tackle. Inches short. And then the Steelers get the ball back. Washington still had all 3 timeouts. You have to get a first down there. And who else but Russell Wilson on 4th and 1 going out there with a hard count and getting them to jump? That's the stuff that Russell Wilson. So even when the deep ball wasn't hitting today, and that really hamstrung this offense because it was not an impressive performance by the Steelers offense by any means, right? Wilson finished 14 of 28 for 195 yards, did have 3 touchdowns, and an interception that was really an arm punt. So not a terrible interception, but he looked pretty jumpy in the pocket. Right? When pressure collapsed around him, he didn't look comfortable. He was holding onto the ball a lot longer. He looked a lot more like the Russell Wilson that Denver paid $83 million to go away. And he still proved that he's the right quarterback for this team because in the biggest moment, the Steelers ran the ball to get back in this game, but in the biggest moment, he goes out there with a hard count and gets Johnny Newton, Washington's really good rookie defensive lineman, to jump off sides and win the game. And it feels like that never happens. Quarterbacks all the time go out there on these 4th and shorts and they want to get other teams to jump off sides. And it's an infuriating play as somebody who's watching football because nobody ever jumps. The play clock winds all the way down. Somebody calls a timeout or you take a delay of game and you punt it. And it just feels like it's wasted time and it doesn't pay off. That time it did because Russell Wilson is a veteran who knows how to use the inflection in his voice and how to have a hard count and a cadence, things that Justin Fields should be learning through osmosis on the sidelines or through legitimate conversations. But the offense wasn't perfect in this one. 75 plays. This game went back and forth. It had an interesting pace to it. There were 9 possessions in the first quarter, which was just completely bizarre. And the Steelers only came away with 312 total yards on their 14 drives, 4.2 yards per play. They were helped by a Washington muff punt that turned into a touchdown. On special teams, they helped Washington with a fake punt early in the game, which let's just go to that right now because they get away with a win. If you don't, that's the decision that's really revisited. The Steelers are up 7-0 in the first quarter. Washington goes 3 and out on their first 2 drives. You're backed up at your own 12 or 13 yard line, ready to punt on 4th and long. And Miles Killebrew takes the direct snap, throws to James Pierre, and Pierre drops it. And Pierre was wide open. So, okay, that's potentially a good decision to make that call if you got the guy open, and all you need is a cornerback or a gunner in that case to make a catch. That's potentially a good play. It gifted Washington 7 points, and it's going to make this performance defensively not look as impressive as it was because Washington's offense is one of the best in the NFL. It's a rookie quarterback. Mike Tomlin always does well against rookie quarterbacks. Mike Tomlin actually recently has done pretty well against mobile quarterbacks, specifically Lamar Jackson. This defense did not allow Jaden Daniels to run for anything. 3 carries for 5 yards. On the ground, Washington averaged 2.7. They couldn't get anything going. They brought a lot of pressure, and the defensive game plan was really, really good coming off the bye week. And all of a sudden, the good coaches in the NFL win off of bye weeks. And Mike Tomlin has won, I believe, now 8 in a row off the bye week. And I have my frustrations with Mike Tomlin. I have my frustrations with this team being in purgatory, but it seems like Russell Wilson is carrying them out of it. And this defense was very impressive. They held Washington to 242 total yards on their 12 drives, 4.1 yards per play. Jaden Daniels only threw for 182, and that was with some meaningful injuries. And those will be things to look at going forward. Dante Jackson went out with the hamstring, and on the final drive, I thought Washington was just going to really pick on James Pierre. They got a completion to Noah Brown early, and then they went back to him. Pierre made a really good play. So the depth is kind of showing up for this Steelers defense. Alex Highsmith rolls his ankle. That's potentially a problem, but that's why you trade for a guy like Preston Smith. So there's a lot to feel really good about coming out of this performance, heading into the hardest part of the Steelers' schedule. Maybe not the hardest 4-week stretch because Cleveland twice in the next 4, Baltimore, Cincinnati in there as well, but 4 divisional games in a row. Then Philly, Baltimore, KC, Cincinnati to close it out. It is going to be very tough, but at 7-2, I'm willing to say confidently the Steelers are a playoff team. They have to be taken seriously now as a contender. And this game proves that. And this game wasn't even that impressive. The offense left a lot to be desired in this one. And Russell Wilson wasn't hitting those deep shots. So where does the offense have answers? That was the interesting thing. In his first 2 starts, Russell Wilson is now 3-0. And he's been good in his first start, great in his second start, and I think pretty shaky in number 3. And a lot of that is because deep ball variance just kind of got to him. When you're throwing so many of these deep shots and connecting on such a high rate of them, there's just some randomness into that, regardless of how good of a deep ball thrower you are. That's not even a critique of Russell Wilson. That's just a fact of football. And the variance bit them today, and they still found a way to win. And they did it with tough running. Jaylen Warren getting into it once Najee Harris went down with his injury Warren fumbles at the goal line and your defense picks you up. You nearly get a safety on what should have been a holding call on TJ Watt in the end zone. You force a punt, a good return from Calvin Austin, and then you go punch it right back in. Like, this team has answers. When things go wrong, they fight back hard and they have real solutions to problems. Another solution we saw in this game, right? I've been critical of the offense. 3 for 3 in the red zone, first 3 trips to the red zone. Finished the game, I believe, 3 for 4, because the final touchdown came outside of the red zone. And the only time they were stopped was a Warren fumble that should have been whistled dead for forward progress. So they would have been 4 for 4. And the things that they leaned on, because you no longer have the Justin Fields running game, misdirection and formational changes. They went to a lot of condensed sets. Russell Wilson just trusted George Pickens to go win early in the game, and he just did go win with a ridiculous touchdown catch that made it 7-0. Then the Pat Freiermuth one that came out of a condensed set. You just create a lot of traffic for a Washington defense, and a perfect throw from Russ leads Freiermuth right in. These are adjustments that a professional and an adult offensive coordinator is going to make across the course of a season. And I think it's been so long since the Steelers have had one that my gut reaction is to say, if something's a problem on offense right now, it will be a problem on offense going forward. And that is simply not the case anymore, because Arthur Smith is an adult. He is an NFL offensive coordinator. He's a former NFL head coach. He knows how to make adjustments. He knows how to solve problems. And he did. And the Steelers were able to run the ball effectively in the red zone, something they haven't been able to do since Fields went out. So you match up the deep ball variance game, right? The regression on the deep ball hit this game. The positive regression in the red zone hit this game. So you have a functional offense still. And that's a great sign for the Steelers going forward, because Russell Wilson probably isn't going to play that poor I won't say for the rest of the season. I don't think that's going to be his worst game. He still threw 3 touchdowns, but 14 completions against a Washington defense that's been fairly porous for much of the year. That leaves a lot to be desired, I think it's safe to say. And you're able to sneak one out against a good Washington team. 2 teams that needed to prove that they belong in the contender conversation. I think both did, but the Steelers did much more, because this game maybe shouldn't have even been as close as it was because of the fake punt that didn't work out and because of the Warren goal line fumble. It could have been, I won't say a 2-score win, but a touchdown victory for sure, potentially a 2-score win. And I think this team is about a touchdown better than Washington. They came into this game as an underdog, and from what I saw today, the way the defense played is why that's true. Is why I think if these 2 teams were to play again in a couple of weeks, Steelers would be favored by a touchdown or close to it. The defense played that well. And one of the first names I wrote down is Patrick Queen. I've been critical of Patrick Queen this year. I think he's looked not a step slow, but a bit indecisive at times. And this was a problem for him in Baltimore until Roquan Smith came, and his responsibility on the defense decreased when Roquan Smith got there. So he was freed up to just fly downhill. And I think in the bye week, it appeared like they got him to a point where either they took some off his plate to let him play fast, or he's just up to speed enough now with half a season in this defense that he's able to play that fast. But the physical ability that he has is clear. I think he's a huge reason Jaden Daniels didn't have any running lanes, because Queen was sideline to sideline as fast as he's been all year, making great tackles. And just a very huge performance by him. And that's why you bring him in, because I also think Minkah Fitzpatrick played pretty well in this game, coming downhill and hitting. and the coverage held up well. This defense is legit against a very good Washington offense. I think they proved that to me, and I think they're soundly better than the Commanders, which coming into the year, that didn't really mean very much. That wouldn't have meant very much. But considering how Washington started the season, I think that means a lot. I think that means a ton. So we're still digesting things here as we do our instant reaction to the Steelers 28-27 last second win, last minute win over the Washington Commanders. And be sure to follow along on YouTube if you are. Leave us comments in the chat. I'd love to interact with the chat today on a Sunday. I know you're probably still football watching, but you want to get your thoughts off about the Steelers. Fire away with any questions you have, any opinions you have. Love to interact with the chat a lot in these instant reaction shows. And as we continue to digest things, I think the next reasonable place to go is the new additions, because I haven't had a chance to sound off on the Steelers trade deadline. They made some moves in the bye week, and it was certainly a busy week. Tuesday, maybe it wasn't the biggest news of Tuesday, but if you're a Steelers fan, it was up there. Mike Williams for a 2025 fifth from the New York Jets. The Steelers got their wide receiver. Maybe it's not the one that everybody wanted. It's one of the ones that I predicted would be in the cards. And Preston Smith for a 2025 seventh from the Green Bay Packers as a rotational depth piece along the edge of the defensive line, an outside linebacker in the Steelers system. We'll start with Mike Williams. He didn't play a ton, and that's expected for a guy who is new to this system. And I was happy at all that he got a hat, to be honest with you, because the Steelers, even once Roman Wilson got healthy after some early season injuries, and now he's injured again, of course, he was struggling to get a helmet. So are the Steelers going to trust any receiver they trade for to get integrated quickly into this offense? And they absolutely did. They said, okay, Mike Williams, you're one of our best receivers. You're a veteran. Go out there and run a couple go routes. And while it's a redundant addition with George Pickens from a skill set perspective, right? They're both jump ball winners. They're late separators. It's useful to have insurance for Pickens. It's also very useful to just have another option that Wilson can throw it up to. And we saw that on the Steelers' touchdown drive that gave them the lead in the fourth quarter. Mike Williams, the Commanders brought a lot of pressure. And I think that was the right decision to make at that point, because Russ had struggled when the pocket collapsed. They did a good job containing him in the pocket, so he couldn't flush out all game. So when they brought pressure, they were still lane discipline, and Russ was going to have to win from the pocket there. He trusts his 6'4" receiver on the outside, Mike Williams, to go win one-on-one. And Williams just blew past the corner. But I think Wilson would have felt good trusting the game on Williams' shoulders, even if he didn't separate until the catch point, because that's the exact type of player he is. And that is a useful player in this offense for Russell Wilson, especially a guy who loves to throw the deep ball, who loves to push the ball down the field, down the sidelines. He doesn't want to throw over the middle of the field. He's done it better than I expected this year, but it's still not the number one thing in his skill set. So A+ on the Mike Williams edition. Even if that's the only game he wins for the Steelers, he already won them a ball game with that route, with that catch, getting open, and simply the fact that he was trusted there. And the broadcast went down to the sideline. Evan Washburn said that this is also a depth addition. I believe it was Washburn that made this point quickly as he did a sideline report. It's not just that they got Williams as a jump ball guy and to win there. He adds another professional wide receiver on the outside for depth purposes, because Calvin Austin would have typically been there, and he got hit on a big completion earlier in the fourth quarter. The independent neurologist signaled down to the sideline to pull him off and have him evaluated. It's unclear if he sustained a concussion. I don't know the reports at this point, but Austin wasn't there as an option. And if you don't have Mike Williams, who do you go to? Ben Skoranek? Scotty Miller? Those guys aren't winning a jump ball there. Van Jefferson sure isn't winning that jump ball. Mike Williams is somebody that Russell Wilson can trust to throw it up to. And that is incredibly meaningful for this team. So it adds depth. It adds Pickens insurance because he can run all the George Pickens routes if Pickens were to go down at any point. And it just won you this football game against a really good football team because he was able to make that big catch. The Preston Smith edition, well, I don't think it was necessarily huge in this ball game. It will be if this Highsmith injury is something that is long-term. And it certainly seemed like it could be long-term because Highsmith rolled his ankle on Jaden Daniels when he was trying to bring him down in the fourth quarter and couldn't put any weight on it heading to the sidelines. I'm not a doctor. I don't know if it's a high ankle sprain, a low ankle sprain, a whatever it is. But I know that thing's going to swell up tomorrow, and he may not be ready to face the Baltimore Ravens, who have some offensive line issues and have a mobile quarterback that it would be nice to get some pressure on in a week. But Preston Smith will be there because once Nick Herbig was injured early in the season, he has not been able to work his way back. Maybe he will eventually, but you need more insurance. The Steelers did a great job of adding it at the trade deadline. There weren't any huge gets to get and huge pieces to get at the deadline. There wasn't going to be a home run deal. I don't think that was in the cards. I don't think a DK Metcalf was ever in the cards. I don't think they were going to be shipping out a first rounder for this team that still needed to prove itself as a contender. So they added depth. And now I think the team did. I think this team's a contender. I did not expect that coming into the season. But if you split with Cincinnati, which just suffered another loss to Baltimore and is likely out of the playoff race, though maybe could sneak into a wild card situation, I believe, with 6 losses already, you're certainly going to be in a playoff spot. You can split with Cincinnati and maybe take 2 from Cleveland. Don't even have to beat the heavy hitters, and you're certainly in the playoffs. Maybe you take a shot at Kansas City, rather. Kansas City barely hung on to beat Denver today. The Chiefs needed a block field goal to beat Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos, a team that the Steelers, while it was close on the scoreboard, handled with some relative ease early in the season. So now they have insurance for that run because it might be a long season. The Steelers might be... There's certainly, I will say with certainty, this team is in the best position to win a playoff game since Ben Roethlisberger hurt his elbow. Because even the good teams that came once Ben got healthy again, there was a lot of fool's gold. And at this point in the season, the team that I believe started 11-0 was getting exposed. It was happening in real time. This team, one of the weaknesses you would say would be, well, if Russ doesn't hit his moon balls, if Russ doesn't hit his deep shots, what's their offense? That happened today. And they still beat one of the best teams in the NFC. So the Steelers are very real contenders. And I think I would still pick Baltimore to win the division if you made me pick right now. Because I think Lamar Jackson is playing better football than anybody in the NFL. That includes Patrick Mahomes. I do not think Lamar Jackson is better than Patrick Mahomes. I think he's playing better football than Patrick Mahomes. So I would still pick Baltimore to win the division, even though the Steelers have a game in hand. But man, I don't know that there are four better teams in the AFC. I don't know that I would certainly say the Texans are better than the Steelers at this point. I think the Steelers could reasonably go toe-to-toe with Buffalo this year with their lack of wide receivers, even with Josh Allen playing as well as he is in turnover-free football. I think the Steelers could hang with this version of Kansas City until Patrick Mahomes pulls off a miraculous fourth quarter drive and puts a stake through their heart like he does against just about every team in the NFL. In the NFC, if the Steelers were the NFC, I think you could make a very real case they're the second best team behind Detroit. Obviously, that's a hypothetical scenario that doesn't have any real bearing on the season. But that's the tier of contender I think that this Pittsburgh Steelers team is. And I didn't expect that coming into the year. And a lot of it is because the upgrades on the coaching staff, because the upgrade at quarterback. And you saw a lot of that specifically in this game, even when it wasn't perfect on offense. And the most awesomest Chris says that Ertz got robbed. I think the original spot of the 4th and 9 play, obviously, is what we're talking about. That was short and gave the Steelers possession that they ultimately ran the rest of the clock away, never gave the ball back with Russell Wilson using the hard count to get Washington to jump off sides. I think the initial spot was further from the first down marker at the 41-yard line than it should have been. But I don't think that it was a first down. And that's what was challenged, that it was a first down. So the play would stand, even if you wanted to argue 6 inches closer. I think from where the original spot was, it was so short that those extra inches wouldn't matter. And if we're arguing about this, about that stop, and maybe the Steelers getting gifted one, if anyone would say something like that about this game, you have a drop fake punt in your own, inside your own 20-yard line, and you spot them 7 points essentially. And then you have Warren at the goal line, who should have been whistled dead for forward progress, fumbling. So 2 red zone turnovers both ways. That's 14 points in a 1-point win. So I'm not so interested in arguing about a yard, because the Steelers were clearly the better team in this game, even if you think that Zach Ertz got robbed. And John Edborg, this was early in the show, said 3 is a pattern, and I believe that John is referring to Russell Wilson, because 3 is a pattern. The Steelers have now won 3 straight games with Russell Wilson at quarterback. He's clearly the answer at quarterback, the right answer at quarterback. My faith wavered a bit midway through this game because it was so deep ball reliant. And I wonder if, obviously, Wilson is still the best option at quarterback. He's better than Justin Fields. I was wrong about that. I'm happy to admit I was wrong, because it has the Steelers on the cusp of legitimate contention for the first time in a while. I do kind of wonder about like obviously what this game could mean going forward for how teams play the Steelers. Because the Jets were so decimated in their secondary that they didn't have a choice but to play a lot of zone coverage and play a lot of defenders in coverage and didn't bring a ton of pressure on Wilson, and Wilson was able to cook them. Washington doesn't have a particularly strong secondary, and Dan Quinn was coming after Russ today and playing a lot of man coverage behind it. And that could be problematic for the Steelers going forward. I wonder if this is something of a blueprint game, because the Steelers, while adding Mike Williams, is an upgrade to the wide receiver core. They don't have game breakers out there. Calvin Austin still isn't that, even though we've seen flashes. George Pickens, while he can beat man coverage, he does it at the catch point. So it's not like Russell Wilson is looking quick over there. Oh, my guy is wide open. He's winning right now. Get the ball out of my hands. So with the Commanders playing a lot of man coverage and not being worried about Russ actually scrambling, you can be worried about him extending plays, and he did some of that today. But without them any fear of him actually scrambling for yards, you can turn your back to Russell Wilson now. So the offense doesn't have that element, and against man coverage, play action is going to be slightly less influential. You're not pulling large chunks of the zone defense and manipulating them that way. That's something Arthur Smith has thrived with since Russell Wilson has taken over, manipulating linebackers, manipulating safeties with these play actions, and they went to it very early. I think the second play of the game was the play action to Darnell Washington in the flat. But after that, Quinn said, I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to come after Russell Wilson. I'm going to make him hold the ball with my cornerbacks winning in man coverage. And for a lot of this game, they did. It allowed Washington to load up against the run, and they were pretty effective defending the run. They have a good defensive line. Don't get me wrong about that. But this is not an overly talented defense. And it's certainly not a talented secondary, because Marshawn Lattimore, who they traded for at the deadline, wasn't even up to speed yet, was not playing. So it could potentially be a blueprint game for how to defend the Russell Wilson Steelers. I think Quinn had a really good plan for it and said, if you're going to win in contested catches, okay, I'll shake your hand. And ultimately, the Steelers did. I don't know how consistently they're going to be able to against better defenses than Washington's. So that'll be something to keep an eye on with what this offense looks like going forward, because this was the counterpunch from the league, right? This is usually a topic for young players. I think it's most applicable to baseball. If you're a young prospect, you come up, a young hitter, we'll say, and you're hitting 400 your first week with 3 home runs, the league's going to start to figure you out. You threw your first punch. Then the league punches back. Maybe you got a lot of fastballs because they don't know if you can handle it yet. Okay, he can. Now let's mix in the off-speed stuff. Let's mix in a curveball. Let's mix in a changeup. Good luck. And you see a dip from those young players in most cases. It's a matter of if that young player, his career will be, it'll be make or break by, can you punch back against the league? And I'm really curious what Arthur Smith's going to do, because I don't know how often you'll be that effective in the red zone scoring touchdowns. That's hasn't been the Steelers' MO for a while. So if this man coverage look against a less than talented wide receiver core is a viable option for slowing down the Pittsburgh Steelers, do a lot of teams go to that? And what's your counter? Because you don't have quick separators. Van Jefferson's not a great separator. He's just a very average receiver at most things. George Pickens is not a separator. He's a dominator at the catch ball. Mike Williams is the same way when he's at his best. And he hasn't been at his best for a couple of years because of injuries. And Calvin Austin could maybe be that, but has yet to prove he can consistently get off of press coverage as an outside receiver. So that leaves him in the slot a lot. I'm not sure what the answer will be, but the offense has to be better against better defenses, because a not very good defense held them in check. And I say all this after a 28-27 win that has the Pittsburgh Steelers at 7-2, firmly in first place in the AFC North, ahead of the Baltimore Ravens, who they play next week. They've integrated their deadline additions, and this team is looking like a real contender. Another chance to sound off in the chat if you have your opinions, you have any questions about this Steelers performance, any players that stood out to you. I mentioned Patrick Queen was a player that really stood out to me in this game. If you have any players that jumped off the screen to you, fire them away in the chat and we'll talk about them. We'll talk about their impact in this one. I think something that was interesting, and I flagged it in my notes and wanted to talk about it, specifically if the Steelers lost. But in a win, I think it's still applicable. So when Washington they were backed up at one point, and there was the Highsmith sack, and then they got a big drive out of it after the Joey Porter Jr. face mask call wiped away the Highsmith sack and ended the first half with a touchdown. On that drive, Cliff Kingsbury gave Austin Eckler called a jet sweep handoff for Austin Eckler, lined up as a wide receiver. And Charles Davis on the broadcast talked about how Cliff Kingsbury, when he's building an offense, he goes player first, not play first. And that's kind of a cliche thing. And a lot of offensive coordinators obviously operate that way, and play callers both in the week when they're designing their game plan and on game day. But I don't think Arthur Smith is one of them. So that play obviously got a first down. And in my head, I juxtaposed it with 3rd and 2 early in the game for the Steelers. I think it was their second drive of the game. They run a kind of power sweep out of the backfield, out of shotgun for Cordero Patterson. And Patterson's been okay, but he's coming off an injury. He didn't look like he had the same burst he did against Indianapolis before he got hurt. Jaylen Warren's back healthy now. And a crucial spot earlier in the game when you have a chance to really take a lead, you're going to Patterson on that down. I didn't love that. And I think that's something that got Arthur Smith fired in Atlanta. He liked to go to his tight ends. Not named Kyle Pitts. Bijan Robinson didn't get the lion's share. I mean, I guess he got the lion's share. He got the most, but he didn't get far and away. He didn't get workhorse reps in that offense. Tyler Algier was a huge part of it. And now Bijan Robinson is blossoming with their new play caller, Zach Robinson, down there, because he's just getting more opportunities. And then on the 3rd and 8, before Wilson had the hard count that jumped them off sides to win the game, they ran the same play to Patterson again, just going the other way, that kind of power sweep out of shotgun. And it was effective. Got you within 1 yard. It allowed you to take the chance to do the hard count and try to get them to jump off sides. But with the game on the line, I'm not sure I want the ball in Cordero Patterson's hands. And that's a clear example of Arthur Smith thinking play first over player first. And I'd rather prioritize getting the ball in the hands of George Pickens, of Jalen Warren, of even Najee Harris, who I think is probably the third best offensive playmaker on this team. And I never thought I'd say that because I would figure he'd be quite a bit farther down. I've been down on Najee Harris throughout his career, but he's been that good this season. So to go to Patterson in those big spots, I think it's just a questionable decision and something to flag, right? I want to be positive about this win because it makes the Steelers a contender, but there are some imperfections on this offense that need to be worked through. And I think that is one. And I think solving man coverage with a blitz regularly with some consistency, because the Steelers didn't have a great answer for it. Russell Wilson looked pretty jumpy in this one, and it was definitely his worst game as a Pittsburgh Steeler. And yet, he's 3-0. 3 is a pattern. As John said in the chat, 3 is a pattern. Russell Wilson has won his 3rd straight. The Steelers have won their 7th in 9 tries. And next week, they'll host Baltimore with a chance to really separate in the AFC North. And I feel like they're the type of team that this defensive performance could have a chance against Lamar Jackson. And not many teams have a chance against Lamar Jackson. So I'm feeling a lot better about it. I just keep feeling better and better and better about this Pittsburgh Steelers team. They're an AFC contender. Today they proved it. The Steelers are a good football team. There's no asterisk about this win. There's no Jaden Daniels injury. There's no question marks about the opposing quarterback, about the opposing defense, like the win over the Jets when New York had 5 defensive backs out. There are no asterisks about this win. The Steelers stamped themselves a contender today at 7-2. And that'll do it for the Instant Reaction Show. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for interacting in the chat. Be sure to like and subscribe. Subscribe on YouTube so you get the notifications. And before we go, another comment in the chat from Christian. Only 3 reasons this was close was Joey Porter's penalty, something I mentioned that negated the Highsmith sack, Warren's fumble on the goal line, and Pierre's drop on the fake fumble. Exactly. The Steelers won this game somewhat resoundingly. There are still issues to clean up on this offense, but this was a thorough victory from a team that looks like it's ready to compete for a division title, and I feel really good about that going forward. If you want to be back next week for the instant reaction to that Baltimore game, make sure you like and subscribe. I'll be there with you. We will talk then, and until then, have a great week, and as always, go Steelers.